Well, surprise, surprise. It looks like the bullshit narrative that Donald Trump and his MAGA cult have been pushing is blowing up in their faces. Because not only does it not appear that this guy was a lefty in any way, if anything, it looks like he's one of them. Which is why they are trying now so desperately to change the narrative. Because the one that they were pushing, that this was a left-wing radical extremist, as the President of the United States said in an Oval Office address, well, that's not true at all. Or it certainly doesn't appear that it is. And what we do know for a fact is that this guy actually fits the same profile that we have seen over and over and over again in these shooting events. He is a young, white male who is a loner to a large degree, and he lives essentially online. That is the profile. That is the kind of thing we should be talking about. Not trying to figure out whose political tribe this guy was a part of, but that's the sick political situation that we find ourselves in. And of course, with someone like Donald Trump as president of the United States and head of one of the two major political parties, of course, that's exactly what this sort of stuff always descends into. Pure tribal partisanship. And from the very moment that we learned about this man's death, the right had their narrative. This had to be a lefty. And the reason why they do this is because if they can tie him to the opposing tribe, to the left, then we can accuse the entire political left, the entire opposing tribe, of being guilty, being complicit in this man's murder. Anyway, so this guy was clearly not a lefty. He comes from a MAGA family that was heavy into the gun culture. There's lots of videos showing that this guy, Tyler Robinson, and his entire family, with guns. From a young age, there's pictures of him. He looks like maybe 7 years old with a rifle. There's nothing necessarily wrong about that. There's a lot of responsible gun-owning families that teach their kids to shoot responsibly and handle firearms responsibly. From a young age, they teach them to go hunting. So I'm not actually, I'm not casting aspersions on this family. I don't know anything about this family other than they're Republican, they're MAGA. The grandmother has come out and said, yeah, that is a MAGA family. They're all MAGAs. So a MAGA gun-owning family, religious. The father's in law enforcement, reportedly. Now, I recognize that some of this, and we're still in the early stages of this. And I'm sure that a lot of the reporting that we're getting even now is going to prove to be incorrect. But it looks like it's all going in one direction. The picture is beginning to emerge. And the picture is clearly not one of a radical leftist. This was not a man, this 22-year-old kid, was not someone who was steeped in radical leftist ideology. If anything, he was brought up in MAGA ideology. Of course, MAGA isn't really an ideology, it's a personality cult. But that, if anything, is what this kid was raised in, not any sort of leftist political indoctrination. And here's the thing, too. And I think, by the way, this explains why that press conference was so light on information. Because yesterday, right after the press conference, I said, you know what? This is all suspicious as hell. Because there was so little information offered. And I think we know why. Because, fine, they got the guy, right? And even though they were all patting themselves on the back, all those law enforcement people who took turns at the microphone praising themselves, they had nothing to do with this. He was turned in by his family. This wasn't some great investigatory operation. The guy turned himself, the family turned him in. And if they hadn't, these law enforcement officials, patting themselves on the back, still would have no idea who the shooter was. So anyway, that was pretty much all that they did at that press conference. They patted themselves on the back and they told us who the shooter was. They told us almost nothing about motive. And in a political killing, That's really the most important thing in terms of informing the public, especially since the entire right, including the President of the United States, told us from the beginning that this was politically motivated and it was done by the left because they hate Charlie Kirk and they hate Republicans and they hate all that. They made this political from the get-go. So his motive is the most important part of this story, and they told us almost nothing about that in that press conference. And I think now we know why, because they were able to discover pretty quickly that he was not a lefty. And if anything, he's MAGA. Or actually, he's more crazy right-wing, it looks like, than MAGA. Oh, and before I get to that, did you notice how we learned that they took this kid into custody the night before they announced this? Why did they do that? Why didn't they tell us immediately? Well, now we know that they literally withheld that information from the public for almost 12 hours so that Donald Trump could announce it on Fox and Friends. So he can get the credit, so he can get the attention by announcing this on Fox and Friends. Is anyone surprised? No. So let's talk about who it looks like this kid actually was, or is. Not only is he not of the left, it looks more and more like he is firmly from the right. He grew up in MAGA. He grew up in MAGA land. He grew up in a MAGA household. But it looks like his online life took him even further to the crazy right-wing nut side of things. Because it looks like he had a problem with MAGA. He didn't like Donald Trump. He didn't like Charlie Kirk. And you know what? I told you when we first learned about this, I'm like, this isn't necessarily a lefty. Why? If this was political, as it certainly appeared, we shouldn't be assuming that this was a lefty, because this could just as easily have been someone on the far, far right, because I told you at the time that people like Laura Loomer had just in recent days prior to the killing come out and attacked Charlie Kirk for not being loyal enough to MAGA and loyal enough to Donald Trump because he wanted the Epstein files released. And so we have that faction, because the thing that's going on the right that doesn't get reported enough, but I think it's going to start now, there is a war on the right. What we have seen over the last 10 years is the right sort of being held together by a devotion to Donald Trump. But that's starting to fall apart. And now you're starting to see these different factions of right-wing nut jobs go to war with each other. And so you have Laura Loomer, you got various factions of MAGA, and you also have these groypers, these Nick Fuentes devotees. These people don't like MAGA, right? They've been aligned with MAGA, but they don't like MAGA. MAGA isn't extreme enough for them. And it looks like this kid was part of that world. And that world hates people like Charlie Kirk. Now, when you listen to that press conference in which they told us almost nothing about motive, because remember, Governor Cox was specifically asked, what about the motive? What was this kid's motive? And he said, I'm not going to speak as to that. I'm not going to comment. I will simply point you to the messages engraved on the shell casing, and you can draw your own conclusion. And that is what the right and MAGA have latched onto, these messages on the shell casings, as proof that this was a lefty. Specifically the message that said, "Hey, fascist, catch." Because they reasoned, the left calls us fascists all the time, so it must have been a leftist. Well, you know what? Apparently that exact phrase, "Hey, fascist, catch," comes from video games. It comes from this online world of video games, as did all of the other messages that were engraved on the shell casings. These are all lines out of these weird online games that this dude was all into. But you know what? So that's not any evidence at all. And that's the only evidence they had. That's not evidence at all that this kid was a leftist. And you know what that says to me, though? That they take that hey fascist catch as proof that they must be talking about us. To me, that's an admission. What are you guys admitting that you're fascists? Are you admitting that Charlie Kirk was a fascist? You know, let's blow this this narrative about the hey fascist catch inscription. Let's blow that up even more, because they try to claim that only leftists accuse other people of being fascists. Not true. Number one, that came from video games, as we said, but also these groiper types have been routinely calling MAGA fascists. Okay, so that term fascist also is used by the groiper far-right movement. But on top of that, you know who else accuses political opponents of being fascists? I don't know. Take a look at this.
American politics today is between these far-left fascists led by Harris and her group. We have a fascist person running who's incompetent. She's a Marxist, communist, fascist, socialist. She's not actually a socialist. She's gone past that. Somebody's got to explain this woman. There's a radical left Marxist, communist,
so there
fascist.
You have the Orange God King himself calling Democrats time and time again fascists. So just the fact that this kid had apparently engraved "Hey Fascist" catch onto a shell casing proves nothing. And that's the only evidence they had. That and the fact that it was Charlie Kirk who was murdered. They put those two things together, and it had to be a lefty. Well, they have no other evidence. And you know what? You know how we know that they know, or at least Donald Trump knows, that this kid was no lefty or is no lefty? That he actually comes from the far right? Because Donald Trump isn't talking about it anymore. He is now already trying desperately to change the subject. Here is a video clip from yesterday morning where Donald Trump, walking out to the helicopter, was asked how he's holding up after the death of his friend Charlie Kirk. And here's what he had to say.
My condolences on the loss of his friend Charlie Kirk. Can I ask for a question? How are you holding up over the last 3.5 years?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty. It'll be an absolutely magnificent structure. And I just see all the trucks. We just started, so it'll get done very nicely, and it'll be one of the best anywhere in the world, actually.
Thank you so much.
I put this video clip up on another video I did yesterday where I was mocking Trump. But I want to make a different point here. This is proof that Donald Trump knows that this guy is not a lefty. You know, a lot of people have said, well, this just shows that he doesn't care about Charlie Kirk. And that's a point I made in this other video I put up, which is certainly true. He doesn't give a shit about Charlie Kirk. None of them give a shit about Charlie Kirk. They only care about Charlie Kirk and his murder insofar as they can use it for political reasons. Certainly that's true of Donald Trump. He doesn't care about anyone. He doesn't give a damn about Charlie Kirk. But the fact that this guy, when asked about how he's holding up after the murder of his friend, he quickly switches to talking about the ballroom. That's not, the reason is not because he doesn't care about Charlie Kirk, which he doesn't. It's to try to change the subject. He doesn't want to talk about it anymore because he knows that this guy was from the far right. He's not a leftist. And that's why he changed the subject. That's why he hasn't been making much of this anymore. This morning I saw on his Truth Social, he's posting about Russia or whatever the hell. He's not posting about this. You know, and maybe he'll try again. Maybe he'll try to tie this to the left again, but he knows he can't effectively do it because it's not true. And that ballroom, desperate attempt to talk about the ballroom is proof that he knows that this kid was not a lefty. So, you know, and here's what I think is going to happen. Within the next couple of days, MAGA is likely to completely drop this altogether. Unless there's new information that comes out that actually indicates maybe he was a lefty, or that they can try to argue indicates that he was a lefty. But absent that, I think they're going to try to change the subject. desperately. They're going to get the cue from their orange God King, and they're going to come to the conclusion on their own that, yeah, this guy was a hard right griper. Okay, this is a right-wing problem. The left had nothing to do with it, and because it's a right-wing problem and the left had nothing to do with it, it's of no political benefit to them. So they need to change the subject quick. And so that's what's going to happen. They're going to drop talking about Charlie Kirk altogether in the next couple of days. But they haven't reached that point yet. So they're still desperately trying to somehow pin this on the left, right? Now, they can't blame it on his upbringing since he comes from a MAGA household. So what are they doing? Well, they have to fit it in one of their ongoing political narratives, right? They have to, they have their boogeymen. They have their groups that they blame for everything. So they have to somehow blame this on one of those groups or one of those narratives. And what they're trying to do now is blame it on colleges and universities. Because this kid was brought up in a MAGA household, so something had to happen to him. He had to have been radicalized somewhere. Okay, well, he went to college, so it must have been in college. And so here's a perfect example of it. Here is a clip from Fox News. This is Rachel Campos Duffy trying to push this idea that colleges and universities are to blame. Watch this.
It is a good point. I want to point something else out. You heard the family member say that this man became more political, this young man became more political in recent years. Well, what did he do in recent years? He went to college. That's where kids are getting radicalized. It's not just online. Our campuses are where a lot of radicalization, hate, and intolerance starts from. And so when he says it's an attack on all of us, I'm going to say this. No, it's an attack on conservatives. It's an attack on Christians.
So there she is, desperately now trying to blame this on radical left-wing indoctrination that this kid was subject to when he went to college. Well, let's talk about his college. He went to Utah State University for 1 semester in 2021. And I really don't think that Utah State University is a hotbed of radical leftism. Okay, so yeah, nice try there. What has been his college experience since then? Since 1 semester 4 years ago at Utah State University? Well, he was currently enrolled in the electrical apprenticeship program at Dixie Technical College in Utah. Do you think that the electrical apprenticeship program at Dixie Technical College is a hotbed of radical leftism? I seriously doubt it. Okay, so they've got nothing, but this is what they do. They've got to have it fit into a narrative. And at Fox News, you know how much time they spend talking about colleges and universities and woke and all this bullshit? That's one of their favorite narratives. So they had to try to make this fit into that. That's the best they got, which means they ain't got shit, but they're desperate. But they're going to find out pretty soon, you know what? None of this is working. So let's just drop it. We don't need to keep talking about Charlie Kirk. Let's talk about something else. Now, finally, anyway, so before I get to the finally, what is true here, what is almost certainly true here, is that this is a kid who had his problems, social problems. Everyone that we've heard from so far says he was really quiet and weird, a loner, and that he lived in this online universe. This kid was probably right-wing to begin with, growing up in a MAGA household, but then living online and being a loner, probably got sucked in to this weird alt-right universe online and got radicalized that way. That is almost certainly what happened here. And that's where I want to end this. You know, listening to Governor Spencer Cox, he got a lot of praise. I wasn't really familiar with this guy before. I found him pretty annoying, to be honest with you. I think he's a guy who enjoys being the center of attention and likes hearing himself talk. That said, he's clearly not as irresponsible as Donald Trump. That's as far as I'll go and describe him there. I really don't know too much about the man. But he did say something that I think we should all be able to agree on. Everyone, no matter what your political perspective is, we should all be able to agree when he said that social media is a cancer, or what, I don't remember his exact words, but he was railing against social media and the damaging effect it has on our society. It is destroying this country in a lot of ways. It is destroying our politics. It is polarizing people. It is radicalizing people. It is awful. He encouraged people to step away, get off of the computer, put the phone down, go outside. He said, touch grass, engage with people, have a normal life, get out of the online world. And to that, I say amen, because he's absolutely right about that. That's what I think happened to this kid. Whatever the political perspective or whatever political rabbit hole he got led down, he was led down this path, it seems, because he had no real life, no real connection to other human beings. His mind was caught up in the online world that took him down some sick and twisted rabbit holes that led him to this. And I want to end with a video of this one guy. A lot of you, I'm sure, have seen this. There's a lot of videos about this, but this guy was really over the top. You know, this guy screaming after Charlie Kirk was murdered. And I want to make a comment about it, but take a look at this guy.
This is such bullshit. I've never been so pissed in my whole life. I just murdered Charlie Kirk right here in Utah. I'm so freaking pissed right now. This is bullshit. I just saw blood squirting out of his neck. I love that guy. He would have been our next president. I am so pissed right now. Why do they always come with fucking violence? Gosh, damn it! Use your freaking words as they're talking to you people! Who shot Charlie Kirk? I'm driving down a Provo right now! I'm so pissed! Damn it!
Now, I understand people being upset after Charlie Kirk's murder. I think, you know, a lot of people just seeing that, no matter what you thought of Charlie Kirk, that was deeply disturbing, right? I can understand. Especially people who liked Charlie Kirk or whatever, listened to his podcasts or whatever, would be upset. But this is a level of unhinged. Like, this just doesn't seem normal. To me, there is such an unhealthy obsession with politics and political figures in this country. I mean, would this guy even have reacted like this if a member of his own family was murdered? I don't know. I'm just saying. I mean, this just, to me, Charlie Kirk, he may have felt like he knew Charlie Kirk because he went to go see him speak. I'm sure he listens to all his podcasts. He probably buys all his cheap crap that he sells on his website and all that kind of stuff. But he doesn't know Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is a fucking stranger. But this man, I don't know. Look, I'm just making suppositions about this man, but there are so many people for whom this is true, and it's probably true of him. So many people. Politics, an obsession over politics, and the tribalism of politics, the us versus them, that this is my family, this is my identity. See, that's the thing. So many people today take their politics and it's their identity. Like, that is in very large measure why people cannot admit the truth about Donald Trump, why it's such a cult on the right. These people will never admit that this man can even do any wrong, because they will never admit a mistake in voting for him. They will never admit that he was wrong, because Donald Trump is their identity. Right? He's not just a political figure that you vote for and maybe you agree with on some things and you disagree with on others. No, he is them. They have taken on Donald Trump as their own personal identity. They identify with him personally. And it's not just Donald Trump. It's a lot of these MAGA sort of cult figures. And that's what it certainly seems like this guy felt towards Charlie Kirk, because that is really unhinged. The politics in this country to far too many people, it is unhealthy, it is unnatural, it is sick. It's, you know, when the era of Donald Trump and all the madness of our politics, when the history of this time is written and people really try to figure out what the fuck was going on in America, there's a lot of things that are reasons for this. Social media and the online world is definitely one. But this is beyond politics. You cannot understand what is going on the MAGA right without looking through a psychological lens. This is more a psychological phenomenon than it is a political phenomenon. You cannot understand what is going on the right without understanding cult psychology. That is beyond politics. This is a cult that developed within the realm of politics. But what motivates these people, what explains their behavior, is not politics. It's psychology. These people are deeply fucking disturbed and twisted after a decade of this. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.